Hello and welcome to the Manage IQ Sprint 179 review. This was a regular 2-week sprint. I'll provide the overview. Kavya will update us on the UI, Adam on the providers, and Jason on the rest. This sprint, as you can see, we kind of went up a lot in the total number of PRs opened. And that has to do that we're trying to configure all of the repositories for white source scanning. And so there was a bot on GitHub that opened a pull request in every single repository that we had that we're following along with. And hopefully we'll get that addressed in the next sprint or two, and we'll have white source scanning in each of our repos. In terms of the number of pull requests merged, it was roughly the steady state number from last sprint and sprint 175 and 176. As to the spread of the pull requests, 19 were bugs, 22 were enhancements, as we're moving forward here. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Kavya to update us on the UI.
Yep, thanks, Oleg. This sprint total 12 PRs got merged into UI repos, 4 bugs, 7 enhancements, and so on. Next one. So all summary pages have been converted into Carbon. In addition to that, added accordion as well for expanding and collapsing the groups in summary page. Next one. AutoST team added this enhancement. So in volume mapping form, host initiator group field is showing only non-empty host groups after this PR. Chargeback rate summary page has been converted to Carbon. This is also part of converting all HTML tables to Carbon. Next one. Yeah, similar to previous one, Gilbert converted time profiles PR as time profiles table as well to Carbon. This is for showing DOM errors as notifications to us only in development mode. It was already written in Angular before, and Martin started converting to React, and after that Melody finished that PR finally. So we also replaced whatever jQuery code in that file to JavaScript as well. I think that's all. That's all from UI. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Kavya. So for providers this sprint in core, we finished up a set of work to raise an exception if a model is, if a record is being created as part of refresh when it should be namespace, but it isn't. This is typically an error in the definition of the class in the provider. Turned out when we started doing this that we found way more issues than at least I was expecting to find, and so it took a while to go through all those. But the core change for this landed this sprint, which will raise an exception if it's going to create a record with a class that isn't namespace on the provider, and that's already proven to be a helpful change. It's already caught issues like this before they landed. We also added a common cross-link VMs collection. This is was defined in a couple of places in different providers where they're looking to create a cross-link from one type of record to another one. For example, an Ansible Tower server to a VM in another provider. The collection was redefined by a number of providers, and so we just moved that collection to core, and we were able to reduce duplication in the individual providers. Next slide. For Amazon, they were still using the older definitions of methods to add collections. Basically, when you're doing a multi-manager targeted refresh in a collapsed refresh, you end up having issues with setting what the parent is for that particular refresh. And so we have added methods to core that make all of this easier. Amazon was still implementing it all themselves in their provider plugin, and so we switched over to the newer methods, and that allowed us to clean up a bunch of extra code from that provider that isn't needed anymore. For IBM Cloud, Nasser added support for collecting metrics from the IBM Kubernetes service, which was an interesting one. It's ostensibly Prometheus. So we were able to reuse a good amount from the base Kubernetes provider, but a lot of the tag names were different. So he had to do a good amount of work to get it to be supported for IKS. But that's now working, that's supported, and there's documentation in the ManageIQ docs to be able to configure this. Hero added snapshot collection to Power VS Refresh. This was, I think, his first, if not his first PR, his first big chunk of work. So congratulations to him on that. We also added a bit of refactoring on how the cloud object storage collector logic is working. Previously, this was put in the parser when it really should have belonged in the collector, so it can be shared across targeted and full refresh. And we also updated some of the Power VS reports to be more specific to Power VS as we split out reports into other providers. Next slide. On the Power HMC side, they added template provisioning, which actually is more of a clone from a VM to a template. Following up, they'll be able to do cloning from a template to a VM in coming sprints. For Power VC, we added split out those reports from Power VS and added some more custom reports for Power VC. And VMware, we fixed an issue where remote console tickets were being saved as Vim strings to binary blobs, which were causing the API and the UI workers to throw exceptions because they didn't know what a Vim string was. And that is it for providers. Jason.
Okay, on the platform side, Joe upgraded our Rails dependency to 6042 to handle this particular CVE. Rails is actually up to 6044 now, so the latest builds should have that. Keenan and Joe have also been working on upgrading Rails and Ruby, or at least adding support for newer Rails and Ruby. So we've had some PRs come in for Rails 6.1 support in a couple of the gems that we use. And Joe added some changes for Ruby 3 support as well. And finally, Brandon updated our operator to operator SDK and API version 0.18. This gets us off of some of the V1 beta 1 APIs that we use over to the V1 APIs, which lets us support newer versions of Kubernetes. Eventually, we want to get our operator SDK upgraded all the way to the latest version, but this was a less invasive change that allows us to support newer Kubernetes. Brandon also fixed a bug in the operator with HTTPD, with the reconciliation of the HTTPD pod that could come up, and that was fixed this sprint. On the technical debt side, Adam removed a bunch of final references to the middleware manager, and Joe removed some references to PG Logical, which was the old logical replication library that we used to use. We now use the built-in logical replication of Postgres, so it's no longer needed in our schema. Next slide, please. On the documentation side, we had a ton of changes. Adam, Nazar, and Vincent added a number of things this sprint. KubeVirt was added to the capability matrix, and we noticed that the physical infrastructure section was missing, so that was added as well. Nasser added the IKS metrics setup, as Adam said earlier, and Vincent added some information about IBM Power HMC to the capabilities matrix. Adam also fixed an issue with the VMware remote console documentation, where it described old ways to do things that have since changed. So a lot of that was cleaned up and fixed. Next slide. On the API side, Keenan's been working on a lot of refactorings. Don't pass class to resource search. This was done last sprint, and some more applications of that were done as well. This trims up the API so that people creating new APIs don't have as much to think about. And similarly, on the API YAML, which is our main driver for the whole API, there was a lot of duplication between put, delete, patch, and post. When mostly they're all the same, we're actually using the same information. So he consolidated a lot of that. So you only have to describe the post and the rest will work automatically. Next slide, please. And finally, on the developer side, as Oleg mentioned at the beginning, I added white source. This is in an effort because Hakiri is going away, and we use Hakiri as some of our dependency management or dependencies checks, if you will. White Source will now do that for us. We're also going to keep using Dependabot, which comes from GitHub. So a number of PRs went out, and I merged a few of them to sort of get a feel for what it will look like and what the kind of issues we're going to run into. Hopefully in the next coming sprint, I'll be merging all of those other PRs. And that's it on the developer side.
Cool. Next sprint will be in 2 weeks on February 9th. Same time, same Zoom channel. And with that, I want to thank everyone, the speakers, the community, and all the contributors to the code base. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.